All right, welcome back, everyone. I think we're just about ready to get started with our next session. All right, so I'm going to take this opportunity to introduce our next speaker. Hi and welcome. We're so excited to welcome Dr. Janani Sivaraja for this next session. She is the Assistant Professor of Urban Forestry and holds the Research Chair on Urban Tree and its Environment in the Department of Wood and Forest Sciences at Université Laval in Quebec City. She's a registered professional forester of the Ontario Professional Foresters Association. She's also an associate member of the Centre of Forest Research. Janani obtained an Honours Bachelor of Science, Master of Forest Conservation, and a PhD in Forestry from the University of Toronto. For over 8 years, she's worked as a consultant, advisor, and professional in Ontario's urban forestry and nonprofit sector. Her work crosses disciplines, and she is passionate about building healthy, resilient ecosystems and communities. Most of her work aims to address and assess human anthropogenic impacts on urban forests and soils. Her lab is positioned at the science-society interface, and her work aims to bridge the science-society divide by working closely with practitioners, industry communities, and the government. So thank you so much for being here today. For anyone, any of our attendees, this session, we do have pre-approved ISA CEUs for, so stay tuned to the end for your credits, and feel free to use the chat function and the Q&A throughout the session to make it as dynamic as possible. So I hand it over to you. Thank you so much for being here, and we're excited for your presentation.
So good afternoon, everyone. I'm honored to speak on a topic that deeply resonates with me, as I feel it is our collective responsibility as academics, scientists, even the general public, to care for our urban forests. And I'm sure everyone in this room today do have an interest for trees or the urban forest, so you wouldn't, otherwise you wouldn't be joining us today. So that's amazing. And at this time, I would like to thank our conference organizers for the warm invitation to come and speak, especially Rachel Jensen. I want to thank her, especially being very patient with my delays in my email responses. So I do want to say thank you very much. And I will also would like to let you know that I'm taking you through a profound significance of our urban trees as catalysts for collaboration. And I'll get into why I think of urban trees as catalysts for collaboration and the vital role we play as researchers and practitioners and tree lovers in understanding how we can nurture and preserve them, so they may reciprocate by providing us with their benefits in the face of many challenges today. I also note, I was told that this conference have a wide variety of ranges and expertise. So some of you are professionals, professional urban foresters, and some of you are just general public interested in urban forests. So I'm trying to find a good balance between technical information and also some general knowledge as well as I'm going through my talk today. If you are already experienced, you might find yourself nodding with a lot of the facts that I am saying today, but feel free to pipe into the chat box. I do like having a more of an interactive presentation. Okay, so before I continue, I do want to ask the audience, what do you think a catalyst is? Maybe someone have taken chemistry, you could just like pipe in your responses into the chat box.
Something that drives a reaction. We have something that provokes a reaction.
That is what it is, and I'm gonna leave it on a hook until about midway through my presentation, only because I do want to transfer into my current role as the research chair and really explain how I use urban trees as a catalyst in initiating conversations with the city, but also with other industry partners. So as much as people do love trees, unfortunately, they do sometimes carry negative narratives. I'm not sure what the talks before me have covered, but people do sometimes, maybe hopefully not this room here, but people do tend to view them as a threat to their properties or a safety hazard during extreme events such as ice storms and tornadoes. So however, their negative impacts need to be mitigated through proper planning and care, which can be achieved through practice-based research. So what I do in my lab is a very applied and very practice-based research that I often find myself collaborating very, very closely with practitioners within the city, but also within the industry itself. When it comes to trees, we should value them just as much as we value people, just as how census data helps us to understand our human population and it impacts. Cities also invest in comprehensive tree inventory data. Not all cities, because of limiting resources, but some of the big cities, large cities like the city of Toronto, city of Quebec, Montreal, they provide crucial insights into our urban forests. But these inventories are growing as a useful tool in monitoring and managing tree health, but often we do not have all of the information, only a partial information of trees on public land. What about the inventory that we do find on private land or in our, like in Toronto, the ravine system? In Quebec, it's much more like in the periphery of the city. Today, municipalities appreciate the benefits of trees, which is reflected in the setting of canopy targets in many urban forest plans. In 2019, 500 Canadian municipalities declared a climate emergency where tree planting is considered one of the solutions to mitigate climate change impacts. So we do, at the Ville de Québec, we do have a canopy target of 35% to be reached by 2025, which is next year. And also Montreal, we have 25% objective to be reached by 2025. Toronto, 40% by 2050. Vancouver, 22% by 2025. So these are all canopy targets that the city does use to measure whether your urban forest planning goals are indeed successful or not. Coming back to Ville de Quebec, and I'm going to be speaking a lot about Quebec City because that's the city that I currently am in and currently work in. So for example, here in Quebec, the city achieved a 32% canopy cover in 2015. And we still have a target of 35% to be reached by 2025. Unfortunately, because of recent so Quebec City, for those of you who are aware of historical insights, has been considered a UNESCO site. So for a very long time, development was controlled, and so we were able to preserve a lot of the canopy. But now, with the population increasing and with other pressures that are facing our cities, has just like other municipalities, we have lost about 1% within the last few years, and the canopy is due to development. The tramway network, which is like the streetcar network we were planning on installing. It's kind of on a halt at the moment. Invasive species, we have the same problems as we see in Toronto, like the emerald ash borer, Dutch elm disease. These are quite pronounced here, but we are still ahead in terms of we have a canopy target of we have a canopy about 31% at right now. Canopy cover targets allow us to measure success of urban forest management practices, also allows us to estimate the ecosystem services provided. We often quantify the benefits we receive from urban forest as ecosystem services. The term ecosystem services was first vaguely coined as environmental services in the 1980s and later cited in literature as ecosystem services in the 1980s. Sorry, it was first coined in 1960s, later cited in literature in 1980s, but it only gained momentum and popularity in the early 1990s when Robert Constanza and colleagues started defining it as a present and future amenities of natural resources in which the market fails to recognize. So the global evaluation of nature at that time in the 1990s was valued almost at $33 trillion per year, which was almost double the global gross national product at that time. And the ability to quantify the value of nature shifted the paradigm that nature indeed had not only gave us essential values, but also a dollar value. I'm going to talk about a bit of the benefits of trees that do provide us at different scales. So this is a study by Livesley et al., where the team talked about looking at it from an individual tree scale to a street scale and to a city scale. And at the tree scale, individual trees provide ecosystem services such as carbon sequestration, air purification, and habitat for wildlife. This is a number of things. If you are tree lovers, you're probably in the know about the benefits that trees do provide. But on the street scale, a well-planted urban tree canopy can regulate temperature, reduce stormwater runoff, and even improve our air quality, offering benefits to pedestrians and neighboring buildings. But then at the city scale, these ecosystem services are completely magnified. A diverse and extensive tree cover can mitigate the urban heat island effect while enhancing biodiversity, promoting overall resilience by reducing energy consumptions, and even providing natural cooling. So when we look into Toronto, for example, and I'm going to go back to Toronto a little bit also because of my prior experiences, these ecosystem services can easily be linked to tree canopy cover. For example, in Toronto, approximately 1/3 of the city is covered in tree canopy, and they are estimated to provide more than $55 million in ecosystem services. But however, when it comes to health benefits, and I'm going to go into some of the health benefits that we are seeing, because I'm going to kind of shift towards my past research to my current research in progress. So when you look at health benefits, they are not always easy to quantify. So technically, the benefits provided by trees are much higher than $55 million. So several studies have demonstrated like a link between natural environment and improved health outcomes. And for example, this American study showed an increase in mortality due to cardiovascular and lower respiratory tract illnesses in towns affected by the loss of ash trees due to the emerald ash borer. So our human health and our tree cover is closely linked. Thus, when we see the impacts of trees at various scales, like I did talk about the Livesey study, I believe we need a paradigm shift and think of urban forests as public health infrastructure. So when we truly appreciate their value, not only their ecological health, but also their human health, we can really raise the profile of urban forests and green space through governmental legislative tools. So this is something that we already see being done by the protection and conservation efforts of many grassroots communities, NGOs, and nature advocacy movements. I believe some of you are already here, but what I also want to push here is this is some of the dialogue that I share when I'm talking with practitioners or partners to collaborate on research projects. For example, my research on shade tree characteristics and human health, I measured human ultraviolet or UV exposure data to assess the shade provided by many trees in the Northern Hemisphere. So this work comes from my doctoral work prior to Quebec City in Toronto. This was the first study to shed a light on the canopy characteristics that offer UV protection in urban areas. So this approach proved to be very successful, and it gained international recognition, even making it to the BBC News. So the point that I'm trying to make here, when we do work in transdisciplinary settings, often you have to use language that is easily comprehensible, like easily understandable by other practitioners. So here I was also able to integrate research methods from occupational and public health into urban forestry work. You could see here, this is a typical schoolyard in Toronto, and even in Quebec, I see a lot of schoolyards with concrete, covered in concrete. And UV light is very high energy wavelength of light, so it can bounce off these structures. So, and we might even be exposed to UV even under the shade of the tree. So when we placed UV sensors that mimic how skin reacts to incoming UV, this is regardless of your skin color. This is a ratio value that we could use. These were set up outside and inside the canopy, and from these measurements, we calculated the protection factor. So similar to the protection factor SPF you would find in your sunscreen, this is how we calculated our protection factor, ambient UV versus average UV proportional value underneath the tree. And just to let you know, the reason why these are at this about I believe it's 1.4 or 1.5 meter height is to resemble small children. I sat at Home Depot cutting these PVC tubes to have the height of a child. because of course, TDSB did not let me test them out on real children, so for ethical reasons, so I have to use some other creative ways. Overall, we did find UV exposure varied with different tree species, so the protection factor varied almost by 2.6-fold among all of the sample species. And one of the fascinating results that came out of this study was that regardless of your skin color, under these 5 different trees, like Norway maple, common horse chestnut, copper beech, swamp white oak, little leaf linden, it would take you about 3 to 3.5 times longer to burn compared to 1 hour of exposure in the open space. And all of these, if you look at it, it's quite dense canopy, and we know we kind of shake shade in these kind of trees with dense canopy, but we did not have any scientific data on this until now in the Northern Hemisphere. I also evaluated why these species were effective, and this was the first study that actually came down to crown geometry. Screening UV was predicted by low crown transparency, shorter tree height, and even wider trees. And with global projections stating that we will be having longer and hotter summers, it's critical to plan for our public spaces with intention. Completing studies such as these enhance urban tree planting for cancer prevention, and it can easily be implemented where municipalities plant trees with intention. And these kind of traits that I have highlighted here are all characteristics of late successional species that you would find in forest succession. So this is not something that's actually like new in terms of when we think to forest ecology, but when we are making the whole connection between public health, we're like, oh, this makes a lot of sense. And it's quite practical, these things that we could use. Now, I will shift to the mental and psychological benefit of trees, and almost all previous studies demonstrated that children attending greener schools have higher learning outcomes even after we control for socioeconomic factors. But what they did not distinguish is the effects of trees. So this study that's coming out of my doctoral work did in fact find that trees in fact had an effect, a positive effect, and the diversity of species matter. So this is again funded by the Toronto District School Board. I looked at how trees impact children's learning using standardized test scores and schoolyard vegetation. So long story short, we did find schoolyard tree cover positively affected all standardized test results. We also did find larger tree effects on schools that were experiencing external challenges corresponding to population demographics. The conclusion that was drawn was that planting trees ranked higher on these external challenges would improve standardized test scores, thus provided ammunition for the board to begin its large tree plantation program, which is one of the focus of TDSB. We also did find that different types of trees or tree composition effects were significant on math. And what's even astonishing is that these different types of trees matter, and these effects were seen on math test results. So combination of these specific species had a positive effect on standardized math test results. So do not go and plant only these species. What this is stating is this diversity of having conifers and deciduous is having some sort of effect after even controlling for socioeconomic factors. So there are even psychological benefits shown by Fuller and colleagues. They did find that a common person who's not a trained professional forester or an ecologist, or just who perhaps do not even have an interest in trees, they found that the common person can distinguish differences in higher taxa, for example, conifer versus deciduous. And as a result, they do have these perceived biodiversity that made individuals feel and think better. So in summary here, I do want to summarize and reiterate that we do need to think of urban forests as public health infrastructure. But when we truly appreciate their value, not only the ecological health, but also human health, we can raise the profile of urban forests. And this is often the dialogue that I start with when I do talk to practitioners when it comes to urban forest management and other goals. So, however, a lot of us who do work in this sector know it's not always the case when it comes to infrastructure development, that needs of the trees are not prioritized. And planting beneficial trees becomes very challenging with urban intensification, where developers end up leaving small and poor planting habitats for trees, and in most cases, choose very unsuitable species. So for example, in this picture, there's a little leaf linden, but there's not sufficient space for the tree to grow well. Also, planting of trees within condos of casting shade, it depends on the type of species being planted, but at the same time, the idea of planting trees are often it's often thought about very at the end, but after planning. So this all needs to be radically changed in terms of incorporating trees within planning. So I'm going to come back to the word I used as catalyst. So urban trees as catalysts. And if we go back to the title of my presentation today, therefore, in my opinion, and this is my thought, trees are catalysts for successful implementation of green and gray infrastructure. And the notion of green nature in the form of trees, municipalities require an understanding of different sectors and disciplines. So I see trees as elements that force humans to work together to ensure sustainability of our cities. But the definition, which comes from the Larousse, stresses that catalyst increases the speed of a chemical reaction without getting lost in the reaction itself. So by its presence and intervention, it provokes a reaction. So what I mean by that is trees can be used for intersectoral collaboration, also cross-sectoral work. It's the coming together of different people, organizations, sectors to work together to understand and solve like very complex issues. But at the same time, trees can be used as agent of change, strengthen partnerships between practitioners and government and academia. If we all have a common goal in order to make our cities more livable and sustainable and climate resilient, we can use trees as a catalyst in focusing on the benefits of trees providing us and how to increase their survivability in the cities can push for more collaborations to be closely done. So this brings me to my current role, which is the research chair of urban trees and its environment. So recognizing this disconnect between planting trees for the multitude of benefits, the research chair of urban trees and its environment was established at Université Laval in partnership with the city of Quebec. The main goal is because they lost 1% of the canopy, they're like, okay, we need to do something about this. So they were looking to develop knowledge, design new methods and tools for the conservation and integration of trees and all of their components. So that includes crown, trunk, roots, and soil in urban environments. They made a financial contribution of $2 million over 5 years. If you're aware of a lot of the research chairs in Quebec, in the province of Quebec, there's quite a number of research chairs that work very closely with municipalities, often during urban forest strategic plan. They work this into their strategic plan to work with academics and academia to ensure a really long-term partnership is established. And in the province of Quebec, most of the research chairs that do exist, they have this focus on above ground canopy, not really much on the below ground canopy. So that's where I come in terms of urban soil and underground infrastructure. So the objective of our work, not all of the projects is linked to urban soil and underground infrastructure, but majority of our projects are linked to this theme. And my lab focuses on the human anthropogenic activities related to urban soil, underground infrastructure, or even other activities that do come across. Again, coming back to this whole notion of catalysts, we use trees as catalysts for scientific collaboration. So within the research chair, I have a number of different disciplines involved, whether that's from academia or sector or municipality or even nonprofit organizations. I do have people trained in ecology, forestry, civil engineering, biology, public health, architecture, agroforestry or agriculture, chemistry, social sciences, and even soil sciences. So we have all of these disciplines working together within the research chair, and that's one of the uniqueness of a research chair, is to bring together all of these disciplines and all of these expertise together. Although I'm a trained forester, ecophysiologist, and I've had experience working with urban soils, I do rely on my colleagues quite a bit, like civil engineering colleagues, to help me with some of the aspects related to civil engineering. So within the research chair, there is a focus on bridging the gap between forestry and civil engineering. So these two are the main disciplines involved, but we do have all of the disciplines that do contribute to our work. I do want to shed light on all of the researchers and collaborators and students involved. This diagram is actually a bit old since last year. We do have new members who have joined recently. And there's a wide net of collaborators who's always involved in these projects across in our research chair. To give you a quick overview, within the research chair, we have projects linked to these three themes. When I did take on the role of a research chair 2 years ago, it's been only 2 and 3 months now, 2 years and 3 months. We did a prioritization activity with the city to understand the needs of the city before we even design and develop our projects. From the prioritization activity with urban forestry staff, civil engineering staff, we found that the needs of the city was really to understand the impact of construction on urban trees, also to understand the long-term impacts of development on urban soils and trees, and projects linked to mitigating climate change. Within mitigating climate change, we have a number of different projects, a bit above ground also, but there's also some below ground. There one project linked to technosol, which is it's technosol. It's a technology that's established in France, where we do have more than 20% organic content or artifacts within the soil. The main objective is to store carbon by reusing some of the urban waste products. Other is climate and drought vulnerability of urban trees. So we do have more projects linked to these themes, but it's just too much to put on today. But I will focus on a couple of these projects today. I also do want to note, before I do get into some of the projects, it's only been 2 years since I started my research chair, so I do have some results to share, and most of it are still in its, I would say, the premature stages, like in terms of we just recruited students to start off last year, so project is still evolving. So I will share some of the work that we have already finished, or some of the work that where we do have preliminary results to get to show some of the work that we are doing. So in terms of related to theme one, we established long-term research site in collaboration with the City of Quebec to monitor short and long-term root cuts in 6 different parks. In 2021, we used an excavator to dig trenches at the recommended distance as per the B&Q or the SIAC, which is the best practice guide in Ontario, and the SIAC is the International Society of Arboriculture in Quebec. So these are standards that are guidelines that are proposed by SIAC in Quebec, which is the equivalent of ISAO here in Ontario. There in Ontario. So used to saying here. Okay. During construction, trees are often suffer damage, and to protect trees, roots, and soil, a tree protection zone is often established. The TPZ size is determined by species and tolerance to construction. So while the TPZ aims to maintain tree stability and vigor, there's really no information on the consequences of approaching the trunk or potential decrease in stability or vigor in terms of scientific literature. Maybe we know it in practice, but it's not really published. So there are no provincial laws governing urban tree protection and practices, which are based on the International Society of Arborists recommendation. Each municipality can choose to adopt these guidelines of their preference. It's really left to the municipality to govern this. However, for those events where excavation is closer to the tree, then it becomes important to assess the loss of stability caused by root cutting. So to answer these questions, we established these long-term research sites in collaboration with the City of Quebec to monitor short and long-term root cutting. And we cut to a depth of 50 centimeters where taking into account the logistical constraints, we use inflow excavation to make sure there's no pipelines or other infrastructure below ground before we did cut them at 50 centimeters. My master's student, Clément Palafré, supervised by Jean-Claude Ruel and myself, who just finished last year, focused on Norway maples, Acer pladnoides, and little leaf lindens, Tilia cordata. These are the city only allowed us to cut these two roots because they were quite abundant in the city, so they were okay to lose some of the trees if needed for this study. We compared standard TPZ to 4 different treatments, and we found that these excavation did not impact immediate tree stability, even when we cut it at 1 meter from the tree. I do want you to hold that point because I do have more stuff to add to that point. This study does intend to monitor the study sites for a minimum of 10 years or more to monitor long-term impacts of root cutting. If the trees remain standing, we already started seeing some epicormic shoots and defoliation happening last summer. So we don't know how long these trees will continue standing, but this is something we do want to monitor. In arboriculture and urban forestry, the static pull tests for single trees are often frequently used to appraise the structural attributes of the trunk, as well as to gauge its anchorage to the ground. In particular, pertinent for like construction activities, which are like near roads or other infrastructure. This methodology follows the principles outlined by Brundi and Juan Vassanayer from the paper 2002. I believe Philip Vassanayer from Urban Forest Innovations talked a little ahead of earlier today, but it is from their group that we did use their work, where we use static pull tests to evaluate tree stability based on their structural properties and root anchorage. The experimental setup did consist of connecting like a tree to like a mechanical winch with a solid anchoring point using a cable. So our solid anchoring point was like a Ford van that we used. It is just to pull the tree using like a software to calculate the force. So you can clearly see how deep we cut the roots. We went until 50 centimeter in areas in line with logistical constraints, of course, and then covered it back with soil just so we avoid any random questions we get from the public because we want to make sure that's still reasonable in terms of after a study. So to investigate the impact of root loss on tree stability, a series of with the control, 4 experiments were conducted. Each experiment involved tree measurements before and after excavation of trenches as to simulate root cutting. So trenches were created using an excavator with a depth of 50 centimeters and a length equivalent to the tree crown projection. We also, when we model tree resistance against wind, involves 2 different types of calculation. One is like the resistance to uprooting. The other is the resistance to stem breakage. So when we did the resistance to stem breakage, which is like a function of wood properties and stem defects, whereas resistance to uprooting is a function of root configuration and even soil properties. So what we did here is because the critical turning point is usually calculated based on uprooting and stem breakage, and the lowest turning point is considered the overall resistance of the tree. In our study, we concentrated on the resistance to uprooting. So we did not, since the immediate trunk resistance of the tree is likely not impacted by root trenching, our work really looked at uprooting versus the stem breakage. So what I'm talking about here is uprooting. So, however, when we do see, in terms of results, we did not see any short-term impact. So there was no short-term significant effect on the safety factor with trench treatments, even when we cut it perpendicular trenches at 1 meter and 1 meter from the trunk. However, I'm not saying we should go and cut it really close to a tree for construction projects. We do want to make sure we are seeing like we are currently seeing epicormic shoots and the trees are quite stressed. So long term, this might have an effect on tree stability. So we are there's a master's students right now working on ecophysiology function of these trees, and I'll talk a little bit about that after. Currently, the Service Canadien de Forêt, the Canadian, what is it? Sorry, Canadian Forest Service, NRCan. We are testing 2 different types of georadars to see if we can get valuable information below ground data. You can see here our team is working very hard. We are also trying to improve methods for obtaining below ground data in urban systems. Right now, we do not have a really good method to evaluate below ground data. I heard from the last talk I gave that there is a lab at U of T that kind of deals with this as well, but we are we are trying to find a way to see if we could see the root below ground. Are they recovering? Or are they decomposing, emitting gases? There's so much questions that can be asked. And so that is something that's still in work to see if this methodology, in fact, will work or not. The other current projects linked to this sites, we don't fully understand the impact of construction activities on trenching or tree ecophysiology of trees. We don't know what happens when roots are cut, their impact on environment. We do know it from a forest ecology perspective a little bit, but in terms of what are these impacts in urban forest, these are still quite new. They can be a source of greenhouse gas emissions, such as methane. We also know, thanks to our forestry research, that wood chips left behind by logging operations become a source of methane. This project was actually done by one of my really good friend and colleague, Juliana Vantalingam, and my old lab, Sean Thomas lab at U of T. We don't know whether the roots recover after construction, so this is something that we are interested in knowing. That's why we do have a second project using the same trees to determine the impact of trenches on the ecophysiology functioning, but also on whether what are some of the associated gases and GHG emissions being emitted. So moving on to another long-term research site established with the Quebec City Maguire project, Projet Maguire. This site can be considered a living lab. To give you an overview, this project is part of Quebec City's Friendly Streets concept, involving residents and commercial vendors in the planning process to create sustainable and community-oriented streets. One major benefit is utilizing the private spaces that we otherwise be inaccessible, addressing the challenge of limited public planting areas in urban environments. So the city approached their residents or their commercial vendors, and they had a partnership to allow the streets to be much wider and cooler. So some of the trees are planted on public land, but some of the trees are also planted 50% on private and 50% on public. So this is one of the iconic Quebec City Friendly Streets concepts. Here, within this project, we did take the opportunity with the research chair to conceive a very elaborative project where urban tree pit design is important for tree growth and survival. So on this site, we have established 9 different tree pits comprising of 94 trees. So this project includes infrastructure design, impact assessment, as well as cost-benefit analysis. Here we do test the impact of 9 different tree pit designs on tree health to justify whether some of the expensive technologies like CU Sol or Silva cells are better than some of the cheaper alternatives. So far, we do have a handful of studies, but to my knowledge, this is the first study of its kind in Canada, or probably globally, where we have 9 different tree pit designs on the same route have been installed, and the city is working closely with us, their university partner, to monitor these sites and find which of these kind of treatments can be effective for the city. So I don't have time to go through all of the 9 different treatments, but just to show you a few examples that include we did include a CU soil, which is a CU structural soil, which contains about 80% crushed stones, and which is a technology that's invented by Cornell University. These stones are also coated with hydrogel, so they don't stick together, avoiding compaction. And we know in urban forests, urban soil compaction is like one of the major constraints and limitations. The other is the famous silver cell, a heat-resistant plastic that mimics the large pores in the soil to allow tree roots to penetrate. We also have the grill trees. A grill is placed on top of the pit to prevent foot traffic while allowing water and aeration to filter through. We also have raised concrete boxes, the same concept to avoid pedestrian traffic foot. But all of these treatments aim to avoid soil compaction. And one of the greatest challenges of urban forestry, and this long-term study will finally establish parameters for the benefits of various structural treatments for maximizing tree health. And my student, Dominic Bartolacci, supervised by myself, who started this project in his honors thesis, so like we call it the projet de fin d'étude, he found in his preliminary work where he used like an indicator of stomatoconductance with the different types of treatment, we find that the simple methods, like the grill methods, is actually more effective than some of the more expensive methods. We had CU cell come up as a third best treatment, but the silver cell was ranked 5th or 6th. So, but this is still yet to be validated. So these are just preliminary studies we have. He did start a master's with me, continuing his work with the civil engineering department and urban forestry department with the city. We are hoping to add more treatments from different neighborhoods and different sites in Quebec City to really evaluate some of these tree pit designs on tree health. Urban trees are quite stressed, and we anticipate climate change can make these conditions more difficult, including higher temperatures and more frequent droughts. We do have a doctoral student. I do not have any results to share with you today, but we do have a doctoral student starting off a project. He's been there for like a year and a half now, supervised by myself and Allison Munson, another professor who just retired but still active. She's a associated professor at Université Laval, and he is looking to look at the ability of urban trees against drought and more frequent in terms of higher temperatures and historical drought conditions. Another project which we're going to be launching this summer is the City of Quebec is very interested in getting data on private trees. So we are partnering with a couple of local partners and organizations to start collecting data on private trees using participatory science approaches like collective canopies, CERFO, AF2R. We know that about 60% of the trees are found in private land, and we do not have a lot of information on it. So launching this summer, this is a bit of a spin-off of a project that would happen in Montreal, but we are using a much more like a forest, like because we are professional foresters, we are using a more detailed inventory processes in taking these private tree data. I'm also pleased to announce that our research here has signed a 5-year agreement with the French Ministry of Environment against climate change to explore ways of carbon storage in the form of technosols. So technosols are widely used in Europe, but our project is only, it's a novelty in North America, where we are looking to aim to increase carbon by reutilizing some of the waste products what we would get from urban forest, but also while reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The chair was also involved. I was recently awarded an NSERC Alliance grant with our multiple research partners like University of Toronto, Concordia, University of Alberta, and cities such as City of Quebec, City of Edmonton, City of Toronto. They're all involved in this project. This is a good pan-Canadian project. The main investigator is Sean Thomas from the University of Toronto, but a lot of us across Canada are involved in this project as co-PIs. The main objective is to reuse some of the urban forest waste to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions from waste in the form of biochar. So one of the waste products that we get is often pruning practices. We waste a lot of wood products that come from pruning strategies, and also when urban forest is impacted by infestations, we create a lot of waste wood. So so we want to evaluate whether this can be turned into biochar to reduce, first of all, one, to help urban soil fertility, and the other is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from waste. The proposed project will provide better data in terms of better quantifying direct GHG emissions from urban soil and vegetation in Canada, which includes like different ways to elicit waste products. We do have Sheetal Ramel, a postdoctorate here at Université Laval. She's coordinating this project across different institutions, across different cities, and there's multiple researchers involved and industrial partners, including Halliburton Forest, Titan, Seed of the North. All right, I would like to conclude this project, not project, the talk, by saying the anthropogenic impacts of human activities on ecosystems are quite undeniable, and it's a reality that we have to face, but the contributions of urban trees and soils often offer very, very powerful catalysts for collaborations across disciplines and sectors. And really, by recognizing their potential or even investing in their protection and proliferation, we can restore ecological balance, mitigate pollution, all of the good stuff that trees do bring us. So on that note, I do want to say thank you very much for listening and tuning in. And I do hope more research chairs or potentially are established in the province of Ontario. I would like to see or some cross-provincial collaborations. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for your presentation. I think we'll move into our Q&A section now. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to use either the chat function or the Q&A function as well. We already have a couple in there. Tim wants to know what the SPF, or what does SPF, maybe I'm reading this wrong, sorry. What SPF does the Norway maple offer versus the silver maple? And is that something you can touch on?
It's been, it's all between 3 to 3.5. Silver maple, like if you go back to, I could go back to the slide actually. Don't have the number by the hand. But Norway maple okay, so we all hate Norway maples because it's an invasive species and we don't want to plant them, but unfortunately that was the best tree species in terms of UV protection. But I'm not saying we should be planting Norway maples. We should plant trees based on multiple objectives in mind. But if you go back, sorry, it's a long way through. It's a 45-minute talk. Okay, here. So protection factor was acylplatinoides was 3.5 versus acylsaccharinum was about 2, but you could see that statistically it was not any difference because it's AA. So pretty much the same.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you. The next question says, do you work with urban wood utilization nonprofits like the CVBU in Montreal or the Urban Wood Network to combine efforts and ways to divert urban wood from the waste stream?
No, at the moment, most of the nonprofits I work with is directly from Quebec City, so Canopy Collective, AF2Rs. The city, we did not include the city of Montreal in our Pan-Canadian project. That's because of logistical and constraints about what kind of team, like we have Carly Zitter from Concordia involved in that project, but Carly Zitter, her work is more on looking at flow of ecosystem services. So it would have been hard for me to sort of go, I do go back, I'm actually from Montreal, so I do go back and forth from Montreal and Quebec to visit family, but the problem is it was just not doable. So we were not able to do, but hopefully in the future we could include them, and we are looking to renew our chair within the next 2 years, and we'll look into that potential possibility.
Yeah. I have another question here for you. On the Guire project, with 9 treatments and only 94 total trees, how do you control for common urban variation among the amount of water available due to street drainage? in brackets, microenvironments such as wind, sun exposure, traffic damage, random variables that come along with being in the urban environment, end bracket. Do you monitor all of those variables too?
Yeah, we do. We do monitor. We have temperature sensors. We have all of those sensors, but at the same time, our instruments are quite. We just bought a new one, and it's my favorite toy right now, and it's good. It actually corrects for these ambient temperature, and we take account ambient temperature and all of those, and we also take meteorological conditions into play when we're recording these variables. So these are in fact taken into consideration. Sun exposure, we have to make sure that we are taking measurements on the most exposed leaves. So though all of the small minor details are controlled for in our experimental design.
Great, great. Yeah, I have another question here for you. Do you know organizations that can collaborate with municipalities for private tree inventories and mapping?
So I do work with organizations because, for example, there is obviously a trust that has to be built with community, and often the NGOs that are on the ground working on grassroots initiatives usually have more of an closer relationship with the community versus a municipality or an academic. So often partnering with NGOs who are doing the work on the ground is a beneficial route to take. So Canopy Collective already works with the community in Quebec City. AF2R is involved with planting trees. AF2R, you could look at it like the Leaf in Toronto. They do a lot of backyard tree planting. So I'm trying to compare both regions here. And so if you partner with organizations that do the tree planting on ground, it does give you access, residents, and often we have much more validity when we're approaching citizens. So we are launching this project this year, so feel free to follow us on Twitter, well, X now, and our website, all of it will be posted every time we have any significant development in any of our projects. All of them will be communicated through our Twitter network, our Facebook group, all Instagram, all of those. I do have a Claudel book. She might be tuned in today, but she is our research professional working for the chair. She makes sure that all of this is regularly updated.
Amazing. Yeah, no, thank you for having that information up there for us to follow you there. Um, I have a question, but another one just popped up in the chat, so we'll go with that one first. You mentioned methane release as a concern leaving wood chip mulch. Is biochar production burning produce methane too?
Yeah. So, so, so we have researchers in economics involved in this project. So I'm not an economist, so I can't answer that question. But we do have researchers in economics who are mapping out the life cycle analysis. So at the end of our Pan-Canadian project, we will know whether using biochar is actually like effective versus not using it. So we will have everything mapped out. That is the goal. Carly Zitter, Rasul from UFT, who are involved in this project, will be closely making the diagram to understand the flow of all of these usage. Me, who work in more applied research settings, I'm involved on the ground, taking on the ground data, but there's people out there who are doing this kind of work within our team.
Amazing. Yeah, and it's great that you have those connections as well to see how things are advancing both in Toronto and Quebec City. My question for you, I know you mentioned that you met with the city prior to your program development to really get an idea of what the city needed and what their goals were. I think that that's really important, both, for students who are, working on like students who are learning, people who are doing research that they want to be relevant to their communities, but then also following through with the creation of jobs that are also relevant to work that the city thinks needs to be done. How did you develop that relationship? Was that something that existed through the position or just comes kind of like with the job? Like how was that collaborate? What did that collaboration look like?
Okay, so just to give you an idea, I have always worked with the city closely, even in Ontario, with as the past president of the Ontario Urban Forest Council, and also my own work in doctoral work, postdoctoral work. I didn't speak about my experiences, but doctoral work worked with the Toronto District School Board, and even City of Toronto took quite some bit, even some of the pilot project in urban soils with Claire Wiseman, with the City of Toronto. But we also work in my postdoctoral work. I worked with the town of Lincoln, Vineland, and so all of this have prepped me well enough to understand how municipalities work and how some of the challenges and truthfully, academics, and I sometimes wear the hat of a professional and an academic. Sometimes academics do not completely understand the practice side of things, and we have to make sure we encourage dialogue even before the onset of project development and co-create projects together. I'm always on the phone. Like my city collaborators have become my close colleagues now. We just call each other up or talk to each other on Teams. Each time we have a problem, how to sort that. Like we are solving problems together, all of these complex problems together. It's not just an academic or versus the city municipality where just the city municipality is just as invested in the project, just as the academic side of the world is. And I think that's very important, and that's sometimes missing from research or scientific research. And this kind of practice-based work cannot happen without really closely collaborating with with practitioners on the side. So that's something that I take into all of the work that I do in my work in my lab. And so just to answer your question back again, yes, experience is one thing, but also the research chair was established by the City of Quebec by giving a donation to $2 million over 5 years to start. Like, so before I was in the position, we did not have an urban forestry program. We had maybe one or a couple of research projects here and there. I came into the role as the urban forestry professor at U Laval. Now we have a full out research program. We also the course that I teach tripled, tripled in inscription. I don't I speak like three languages. Everything is
Yeah.
confused. But inscriptions or enrollment.
That's, yeah. I
Enrollments.
knew where you were getting.
Okay, good. So, all of the students tripled in enrollment, and urban forestry program is really taking off at U Laval, and the training of urban foresters are taking off. But this is something that U Laval wanted, and the City of Quebec sort of facilitated that process.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. And I think it's really important, important work that you're, bridging that gap. So thank you for that. I think we're nearing, our closing out time. But I think there's two more questions that I have here. So I think if we have time, we can maybe address those. Thank you so much your energy and your time here today. I think that I can see there's also a couple of questions about whether you share your slides and where people can access this afterwards, because it's really, like a wealth of information. Um,
Uh,
okay, so next question. Are there some trees that you think we need more of? York, your research shows that kids do better at math and are protected under the shadow of these trees. And then he follows up by saying sweet gums give off VOCs. So not all trees are created equal. So are there certain trees that you think we need more of?
I think we just need to make sure we're incorporating diversity of trees. I don't think there is one tree is more superior to another. Like I'm not advocating for that, but I mean, based on some of the tools we provide you, it is up to the municipalities and city planners to, okay, consider all of these criteria and see whether we could plant more of these trees. Like not make decisions like close-sided. That's what I'm preaching here, maybe, but really take all of the information, this wealth of knowledge that is being shared. And it is not my job well, I'm in academia. It is for the practitioners in municipalities, city planners to actually make the most appropriate choices. we do follow like a Sagamore rule, like 5, 10, 20, or 5, 10, 15, or like I forgot the number right off the top of my head, but this is some of these ideal diversity species indexes to be used. But sometimes in cities it's quite difficult because some of the available species come from nurseries, and we tend to only have access to certain different types of species on stock. So understanding the logistical constraint and making wise choices is important.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you. And then my last question here for you is relating back to the biochar, the wood chips. Do you know of any research looking at the methane release of wood chips versus the higher carbon sequestration of healthier trees that have mulch?
No, but you could wait and see with our
Yeah.
work. We are using biochar as mulch. We have control sites, and then we have biochar treated pits. So our work will inform that question. So it's good that you're already thinking that far, but
Mhm.
we will have some answers for you in a couple of years.
Amazing. I think, again, I can reiterate what people are saying in the chat that we really look forward to seeing where your research goes and what all the results will be. So I think people will definitely be staying tuned. And again, I appreciate you putting all your information up there so we can follow you on that. But yeah, thank you so much for being here today and for sharing this. We really, I learned a lot, and I really appreciate even though it's not completed yet, for you to give us this insight into where it's headed, and hopefully, provide us with a lot to think about. So really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Rachel, and thank you for everyone for tuning in. Bye.
All right, thanks so much. Take care.